The pain in Matthias Aldren's leg had become a constant companion, a searing reminder that he was going to lose everything he had worked for these past 3 years. He lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling beams of his modest farmhouse, listening to the autumn wind whistle through the gaps in the shutters while his wheat stood ready in the fields, golden and perfect, and completely out of reach. The break had been clean, the traveling physician had said, but clean did not mean quick to heal, and 6 weeks was an eternity when your entire livelihood depended on bringing in the harvest before the rains came. Matthias had built this farm from nothing after his discharge from the king's army. The land had been cheap because it sat on the frontier, close enough to the contested territories that most sensible folk avoided it. But he had been a soldier for 12 years, and danger did not frighten him the way poverty did. He had cleared the fields himself, stone by stone, built the house and barn with his own hands, planted every seed with hope that he might finally have something that belonged to him alone. And now, because his ladder had been old and weak and he had been careless, all of it would rot in the field while he lay here useless. The break had happened 4 days ago. He had been repairing a section of the barn roof when the rung gave way beneath him. The fall itself had been short, but he had landed badly, and the sound of his leg snapping would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had managed to drag himself inside, splint the leg with boards torn from a crate, and bind it as best he could with strips of cloth. The physician had come the next day, summoned by a passing trader who had heard Matthias's shouts. The old man had examined the leg, set it properly, and delivered his verdict with the kind of gentle finality usually reserved for terminal diagnoses. 6 weeks minimum before you can put weight on it, the physician had said. 8 would be better, and even then, no heavy labor for another month after that. Matthias had tried to explain about the harvest, about how he had no family nearby, no money to hire help, no time before the weather turned. The physician had been sympathetic but firm. Walking on that leg before it healed would mean losing the leg entirely or worse. So Matthias had paid the man's fee with coins he could not spare and resigned himself to ruin. He slept poorly that night, fever dreams full of golden wheat blackening and falling while he crawled through the fields on his hands and knees, trying futilely to gather it all. He woke several times, disoriented and sweating, before finally falling into a deeper sleep just before dawn. When consciousness returned, the quality of light in the room had changed. It was mid-morning at least, possibly later. Matthias blinked at the ceiling, cataloging the various pains in his body, then became aware of a sound that should not be there. It was rhythmic and steady, a distant whisper that his soldier's instincts identified immediately as scything. Someone was working in his field. For a moment, he wondered if he was still dreaming. Then anger flared hot in his chest. Some opportunist had decided to help themselves to his harvest while he lay helpless. Matthias pushed himself upright, ignoring the sick wave of pain from his leg, and grabbed the crutch the physician had left propped against the wall. He had a hunting bow somewhere, and whoever was stealing from him was about to discover that a broken leg did not make him defenseless. It took him far too long to cross the small house. Every movement sent fresh agony through his leg despite the splint, and by the time he reached the door, he was breathing hard and spots danced in his vision. He steadied himself, opened the door, and looked out at his field. A figure worked among the wheat, moving with steady efficiency. Not a human figure, Matthias realized with a start. Even at this distance, he could see the green cast to the skin, the powerful build, the way the scythe moved in long, practiced arcs. An orc. An orc woman, from the shape of her, cutting his wheat as if she had every right to be there. Matthias's hand went to his belt, seeking a sword that was not there anymore. He had left military life behind, had put away his weapons except for hunting. But every instinct from 12 years of border warfare was screaming at him now. Orcs were the enemy. Orcs raided human settlements, burned farms, killed anyone who got in their way. And one was in his field, probably scouting for a larger warband, making note of how isolated he was and how defenseless. He should go back inside, bar the door, and hope she left. Confronting her would be suicide in his condition. But this was his land, his wheat, and 3 years of his life stood in that field. The thought of hiding while someone took it from him made something stubborn and furious rise in his chest. Matthias gripped his crutch and started down the path toward the field, each step a separate negotiation with pain. The orc woman had her back to him, focused on her work. As he drew closer, he could see that she was not just cutting the wheat randomly. She was doing it properly, gathering it into neat bundles and standing them up in shocks to dry, exactly the way it should be done. It made no sense. Why would an orc raider be harvesting his wheat correctly? He was perhaps 20 feet away when she turned and saw him. Matthias froze, his breath catching despite himself. She was tall, easily matching his own 6 feet, with broad shoulders and arms corded with muscle. Her skin was a deep green, like pine needles, and small tusks curved up from her lower jaw. Her hair was black and bound back in a practical braid, and her face, once he got past the initial shock of seeing an orc up close, had a striking quality to it. Strong features, high cheekbones, and eyes that were a startling amber color. They stared at each other for a long moment. Matthias was acutely aware that he was leaning on a crutch, wearing only his nightshirt and trousers, and probably looked like he might fall over at any moment. The orc woman straightened, the scythe held loosely in one hand, and he saw her assess him with a glance that took in everything. "You should not be walking on that leg," she said. Her voice was low and accented, but her human speech was clear. "The way you are sweating, you will faint before you make it back to your house." Matthias opened his mouth, closed it, then forced words out. "What are you doing in my field?" "Cutting your wheat," she said, as if this should be obvious. "It needs to be brought in soon or it will be ruined." "Why?" The question came out harsher than he intended. "Why would you do that?" The orc woman's expression shifted, something guarded moving behind her eyes. "Does it matter?" "Your wheat will rot otherwise. Go back to your house and rest. I will finish this." "It matters," Matthias said. His leg was shaking now, threatening to give out, but he stayed upright through sheer willpower. "I need to understand what is happening. Are there others? Is this some kind of trick?" Her amber eyes narrowed. "There are no others. There is no trick. I am harvesting your wheat so that your winter stores will not be lost. That is all." "But why?" Matthias heard the desperation creeping into his voice and hated it. "Orcs do not help humans. You should be trying to kill me or burn my farm, not bring in my harvest." Something painful flickered across her face, gone too quickly for him to interpret. "Perhaps I am not a typical orc," she said quietly. "Go back inside before you hurt yourself further. I will work until sunset, and then I will leave. You need not see me again." The world was starting to tilt around Matthias. He had pushed himself too far, and his body was reaching the end of its tolerance for being upright. Pride warred with pragmatism, and pragmatism won. "I cannot pay you," he said. "I have almost nothing left after the physician's fee. I am not asking for payment." She took a step toward him, one hand extending as if she thought he might fall. "Please, go rest. I will not harm you or your property. You have my word." Matthias wanted to argue further, to demand real answers, but black spots were closing in on his vision, and his leg felt like it was being crushed in a vice. He managed a nod, turned with agonizing care, and began the slow journey back to his house. Behind him, after a moment, he heard the rhythmic whisper of the scythe resume. He barely made it through the door before his strength gave out. Matthias collapsed onto his bed, shaking and nauseated, the leg throbbing with a pain so intense it made him gasp. Foolish. He had been so incredibly foolish to go out there. But at least now, he knew what was happening, even if he did not understand why, through the open door, he could see the orc woman working. She moved with a steady, practiced rhythm that spoke of long familiarity with farm labor. This was not someone pretending to know what they were doing. This was someone who had worked harvests before, who knew exactly how to cut and bundle and shock the grain for proper drying. Matthias watched her despite himself, trying to reconcile everything he thought he knew about orcs with the reality of what he was seeing. He must have dozed off because when he woke, the angle of the light had changed dramatically. It was late afternoon now, and his mouth was dry as sand. Matthias forced himself to sit up carefully, checking that his leg was still properly splinted. Everything seemed intact, though he had definitely set back his healing with his earlier foolishness. The orc woman was still working. She had made remarkable progress. Perhaps a quarter of the field was cut and shocked now, neat rows that stood waiting for the sun to finish drying the grain. As Matthias watched, she paused, stretched, and then walked to the edge of the field where she had left a pack. She drank from a water skin, ate something quickly, and then returned to work. Matthias's own hunger and thirst finally drove him to move. He managed to get to his small kitchen area without falling, found some bread and cheese that had not yet gone bad, and ate mechanically while watching the orc woman through the open door. The harvest was everything to him, the difference between surviving the winter and destitution. And this stranger was saving it, asking nothing in return, for reasons she would not explain. It made no sense. In his 12 years as a soldier, Matthias had fought orcs dozens of times. They were fierce, brutal warriors who gave no quarter and expected none. The border wars had been bloody affairs with atrocities on both sides, though human commanders always claimed orcs started it. Matthias had been too busy trying to stay alive to worry about politics, but he had seen orc raiders burn villages and carry off captives. The idea that one would help a human, especially a former soldier who had probably killed her kin, was impossible, yet it was happening. The sun was setting when the orc woman finally stopped. She gathered her tools, took a long drink from her water skin, and then, to Matthias's surprise, began walking toward his house. He tensed, one hand moving toward the kitchen knife he had left on the table, but she stopped several feet from the door. "I will return tomorrow," she called out. "If you try to work yourself, you will make your injury worse. Stay inside and rest." "Wait," Matthias said, pushing himself upright. He made his way to the door, moving more carefully than he had that morning. "I do not even know your name." The orc woman hesitated, and for a moment he thought she would not answer. Then she said, "Grasha." "Grasha," Matthias repeated. "I am Matthias Aldren." "I know," she said. "Your name is on the land deed posted inside your house." Of course she had looked. Anyone would have. Matthias shifted his weight, trying to find a position that did not make his legs scream. "Why are you doing this, Grasha? Please, I need to understand." Her amber eyes met his, and in the fading light her expression was difficult to read. "Because I know what it is to lose everything to circumstances beyond your control," she said finally. "Because this land is hard enough without pointless suffering added to it. Because I can help, and so I am." It was not a complete answer, Matthias could tell, but it was clearly all he was going to get. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I do not know how I will ever repay this." "There is no debt," Grasha said firmly. Rest, heal, I will see you tomorrow." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the tree line at the edge of his property before the last light faded. Matthias stood in the doorway until the evening chill forced him back inside, his mind churning with questions that had no answers. That night, he dreamed again, but not of rotting wheat. He dreamed of amber eyes and strong hands and a voice saying there is no debt. Grasha returned at dawn, and Matthias was ready for her. He had spent the evening and early morning preparing, and when she approached the field, he called out from the doorway. "I have breakfast," he said. "It is not much, but you should eat before you work." She paused, her expression wary. "That is not necessary." "Maybe not," Matthias said. "But it is the least I can do. Please." After a long moment, Grasha changed direction and approached the house. Matthias had set out bread, cheese, some dried meat, and a pot of the herbal tea the physician had left him. She looked at the spread, then at him, and something in her face softened fractionally. "Thank you," she said quietly, and sat down on the bench outside his door. They ate in silence for a while. Matthias watched her covertly, noting details he had missed in yesterday's confusion and pain. She wore practical clothing, leather trousers and a sturdy tunic that had seen better days but was clean and well maintained. Her hands were calloused from hard work, with old scars crossing the knuckles. Up close, her tusks were actually quite small, barely protruding past her upper lip, and her face was more expressive than he had expected. "How did you know I was injured?" Matthias asked finally. Grasha finished chewing a piece of bread before answering. "I was passing through 2 days ago. I saw you fall from the roof. I watched the physician come and heard his orders to you." "You watched," Matthias said slowly. "From where?" "The tree line." She gestured toward the forest. "I camp there sometimes when I am traveling this region." "So you have been here before?" "Several times over the past year." Grasha's amber eyes met his. "This is good land, well maintained. I have been impressed by how much you have built here alone." The thought that an orc had been watching him periodically for a year should have been frightening. Instead, Matthias found it oddly reassuring. If she had wanted to harm him, she could have done so many times before now. "You travel alone?" he asked. Something shuddered in her expression. "Yes." "That is dangerous, is it not? Even for an orc, especially for an orc," Grasha said quietly. "But I have my reasons." Matthias sensed he was approaching territory she did not want to discuss and changed the subject. "The work you did yesterday was excellent. You clearly know farming." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I was raised on a farm before I was old enough to be pushed toward warrior training. My mother grew wheat and barley, among other things. I spent many harvests learning the work." "Was?" Matthias asked, then immediately regretted it. "I am sorry. You do not have to answer that." "She died," Grasha said flatly. "Raiders burned our farm when I was 14, killed everyone but me. I survived because I hid like a coward." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. Matthias knew that tone, had heard it from other soldiers who had survived when their comrades had not. "Surviving is not cowardice," he said. "It takes its own kind of courage." Grasha looked at him sharply, as if surprised by his words. For a moment, something unguarded showed in her face, a deep well of old pain that she quickly covered. "You were a soldier," she said. It was not quite a question. 12 years in the border legions, Matthias confirmed. "I fought orcs, probably fought your people specifically, depending on which clans held the territories I patrolled. And yet you let me bring in your harvest." "I am not sure let is the right word," Matthias said with a wry smile. "I could not stop you if I tried, and we both know it. But yes, I suppose I am choosing to trust you, at least provisionally. You saved my livelihood. That means something." Grasha studied him for a long moment. You are not what I expected from a human farmer and former soldier. You are not what I expected from an orc warrior either, Matthias replied. Perhaps we are both full of surprises. That almost smile touched her lips again, and then she stood. I should work. The weather will turn soon. Let me know if you need anything, Matthias said. I may be trapped in this house, but I can at least provide food and water. Grasha nodded and headed to the field. Matthias watched her go, then forced himself to do the careful exercises the physician had prescribed. If he could not help with the harvest, he could at least make sure he healed as quickly as possible. The days fell into a rhythm. Grasha would arrive at dawn, share a simple breakfast with Matthias, and then work in the field until the light failed. In the evening, she would report on her progress, accept whatever simple dinner Matthias had managed to prepare, and then disappear into the forest to her camp. Slowly, gradually, they began to talk. Matthias learned that Grasha had left her clan 3 years ago, after what she would only describe as a profound disagreement about honor and duty. She had been wandering since, taking odd jobs where she could find them, avoiding both orc and human settlements as much as possible. She lived on the margins, neither fully part of nor fully separate from either world. You not get lonely? Matthias asked one evening as they sat outside his house, watching the stars emerge. Grasha was quiet for a long time. Every day, she finally said. But loneliness is better than compromising who I am. Matthias understood that feeling perhaps better than she knew. His own decision to leave the army and start a farm had cost him friendships and the respect of his commanding officers, who thought he was wasting his talents. But he had been tired of killing, tired of following orders that made no sense, tired of the person the military was shaping him into. Better to be alone and at peace than surrounded by people while losing himself. What was the disagreement about? He asked. The one that made you leave. Grasha's jaw tightened. My clan was planning a raid on a human village. Families, children, people who had nothing to do with the border wars. I argued against it. I was told that my sympathy for humans made me weak and that if I would not fight, I should leave. So I did. Matthias absorbed this. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was necessary, Grasha said. I had already lost one family to pointless violence. I would not be part of inflicting that on others. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of shared understanding between them. Matthias found himself thinking about the raids he had fought against, the orc warriors he had killed. Had any of them been like Grasha, swept up in clan politics and fighting because they had no other choice? The thought was uncomfortable, undermining the simple narratives he had constructed to survive his military service. You ever regret it? He asked. Leaving your clan? Every day, Grasha said again, but I would make the same choice again. On the 5th day of her work, storm clouds began gathering in the west. Grasha looked at them with concern during their breakfast. I need to work faster, she said. If the rains come before the wheat is fully shocked and dried, much of it will be ruined anyway. How much is left? Matthias asked. Perhaps 1/3 of the field, 2 more days of work at my current pace. But the storm will come tonight or tomorrow. Yes, Matthias made a decision he knew was probably foolish but felt necessary anyway. Then I will help. Grasha's head snapped around. No. Your leg is not healed enough. You will injure yourself worse. I can sit, Matthias said. Bring me bundles of wheat and I will bind them properly while you cut. It will speed the work considerably and I will not be putting weight on my leg. Matthias, this is a bad idea. My entire life has been built on bad ideas that somehow worked out, he said with a slight smile. Please, let me help save my own harvest. Grasha looked like she wanted to argue further, but the darkening clouds made her decision for her. If you feel any pain worse than normal, you stop immediately. Understood. Understood. They worked through the day in a pattern of desperate efficiency. Grasha cut the wheat and carried armfuls to where Matthias sat on a low stool at the edge of the field. He bound the sheaves quickly, and she arranged them in shocks to dry. It was exhausting work even sitting down, and by midday Matthias's hands were blistered, and his leg ached fiercely from the constant position. But they were making real progress, far faster than Grasha could have managed alone. They worked through dinner, eating bread and cheese without pausing. The clouds drew closer, and the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. Grasha pushed herself harder, moving with a grim determination that Matthias recognized from long military marches. This was someone who knew how to endure. The last of the wheat was cut just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Grasha helped Matthias hobble back to the house, and they collapsed inside just as the sky opened up. Rain hammered on the roof, and wind howled around the walls, but the harvest was in. Not perfectly dried, perhaps, but shocked and protected enough to survive the storm. They sat on the floor, backs against the wall, both too exhausted to move further. Matthias's hands were bleeding from burst blisters, and Grasha's tunic was soaked with sweat despite the autumn chill. He should get up, find bandages, offer her water, do something other than sit here, but his body would not cooperate. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse. "You should not have worked," Grasha said, but there was no heat in it. "Your leg will be angry with you tomorrow." "Worth it." She turned to look at him, her amber eyes catching the firelight from his small hearth. "You are a strange man, Matthias Aldren, because I wanted to save my own wheat. Because you trusted me to help you." She paused, something vulnerable showing in her expression. "Because you speak to me like I am a person, not a monster." Matthias felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of how lonely they both were, how much this unexpected companionship had come to mean in just a few days. "You are a person," he said quietly. "A person who saved me from ruin, who worked for days asking nothing in return, who shared meals and stories with me. Why would I see you as anything else?" Grasha looked away, but not before he saw the sheen of moisture in her eyes. "Most humans do not think that way." "Most humans are fools," Matthias said. "I spent 12 years following their orders and trying not to die for their causes. I know exactly how foolish they can be." A sound escaped Grasha that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Most orcs would say the same about humans." "Then perhaps we are all just fools together, killing each other over lines on maps and old grudges." "Perhaps," Grasha said softly. The rain continued through the night. Matthias insisted that Grasha stay in the house rather than return to her camp in the storm. He gave her his blanket and tried to make himself comfortable on the floor, but she protested until they reached a compromise of sharing the space, each with their own coverings, maintaining a respectful distance. Matthias lay awake for a long time, listening to the rain and Grasha's steady breathing. Something had changed between them during the desperate race against the storm. The walls they had both maintained were cracking, and Matthias was not sure what would happen when they came down completely. He only knew that the thought of Grasha leaving once the harvest was finished felt wrong in a way he could not quite articulate. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the storm having passed through quickly. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, and then Grasha said the words Matthias had been dreading. "The wheat is shocked. It needs a week to dry fully, and then you will need to thresh it, but the hardest work is done. I should move on." "Why?" The word came out more sharply than Matthias intended. "I mean, where do you need to be?" "Nowhere specific," Grasha admitted. "But I have already stayed longer than I usually do in one place. It is safer to keep moving." Safer from what? She hesitated. From being noticed, from questions. From angry humans who would kill me on sight, or angry orcs who would drag me back to my clan for punishment. You are not safe in the forest alone either, Matthias pointed out. Winter is coming. You have no permanent shelter, no stores of food. What will you do when the snows start? What I always do. Survive. Matthias took a breath, knowing he was about to step over a line that could not be uncrossed. Stay here, at least through the winter. The barn has a loft that could be made comfortable. You would have shelter, regular meals, and you would not have to keep looking over your shoulder constantly. In exchange, you could help with the daily work as my leg heals. It would benefit us both. Grasha stared at him as if he had suggested they fly to the moon. Matthias, do you understand what you are offering? If anyone discovers an orc living on your property, you would be branded a traitor. They would burn your farm and possibly hang you. Then we will make sure no one discovers it, Matthias said. I am isolated here. The nearest neighbor is miles away. Traders come by occasionally, but I can see them coming from far off. It can work if we are careful. Why would you take such a risk? Because you saved my harvest and my livelihood, and I cannot let you go back to barely surviving in the forest, Matthias said. Because in the past week, you have been better company than most humans I have known. Because it is the right thing to do. He did not say, because I do not want you to leave, because I have started looking forward to our conversations, because the thought of being alone again after this feels unbearable. But he thought she might hear it anyway in the silence between his words. Grasha's expression was conflicted, hope and fear warring visibly. This could go badly in so many ways. Everything worthwhile carries risk, Matthias said. Stay, please. At least think about it. I have thought about little else for the past 2 days, Grasha admitted. I just could not believe you would actually offer. Is that a yes? She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, I will stay through the winter, but if this becomes dangerous for you, I leave immediately. That is not negotiable. Relief flooded through Matthias, stronger than he expected. Agreed. Now, let me show you the barn loft. We will need to make it more weatherproof before the real cold sets in. They spent the morning examining the barn and making plans. The loft was dusty and full of old farm equipment, but it was spacious and structurally sound. With some work, it could be made quite comfortable. Grasha threw herself into the project with enthusiasm, and Matthias realized she was excited about the prospect of having a real home, even a temporary one. Over the following days, they worked together to prepare for winter. Matthias's leg was healing well enough that he could move around more easily, though he still could not handle heavy labor. Grasha cleared and cleaned the loft, repaired holes in the roof, and built a small stove from stones and scrap metal. Matthias provided blankets, helped weatherproof the walls with mud and straw, and built a ladder that was sturdier than the one that had betrayed him. They fell into an easy partnership. Grasha handled anything requiring strength or climbing, while Matthias managed planning and detail work that could be done sitting down. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and discovering unexpected commonalities. Both had lost families. Both had walked away from the lives they were expected to lead. Both understood what it meant to be alone by choice rather than circumstance. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Grasha said quietly, "I have not felt this settled in 3 years. Thank you for giving me this." "Thank you for staying," Matthias replied. This farm was becoming a lonely place. She glanced at him, something soft in her expression. "Was it very lonely?" "Before I came, more than I realized," Matthias admitted. "I told myself I preferred solitude, that I was content with just my work. But having someone to talk to to share meals with, to plan things together with. It makes me realize how much I was missing." "I understand that feeling," Grasha said. "I told myself the same things about wandering alone. But this, having a place and a person to come back to each day, it reminds me what actually matters." They sat in companionable silence as the stars emerged. Matthias was acutely aware of Grasha's presence beside him, the warmth of her shoulder almost touching his. Something was growing between them, something neither had quite acknowledged but both felt. It should have been frightening. She was an orc, he was a human, and their peoples had been killing each other for generations. But out here, far from the judgments and expectations of both their worlds, it felt like the most natural thing imaginable. Winter arrived in earnest a few weeks later. The first snow fell on a quiet morning, transforming the farm into something from a childhood story. Matthias woke to find Grasha standing in the doorway of the barn, watching the snow fall with an expression of pure wonder. "You not get snow where you are from," he called out, limping over on his crutch. His leg was much better but still not fully healed. "We did," Grasha said. "But I have not stopped to simply watch it in 3 years. I was always too focused on surviving the cold to appreciate the beauty." They stood together watching the snow, and Matthias found himself thinking that this was what peace looked like. Not the absence of war, but moments like this, simple and quiet and shared with someone who understood. The winter settled into a rhythm all its own. Matthias's leg finally healed enough to walk without the crutch, and he began taking on more of the daily work. Together, he and Grasha tended the animals, repaired equipment, and processed the harvested wheat. They worked side by side through the short days and long nights, and somewhere in the midst of it, friendship deepened into something more. Matthias was not sure when exactly he fell in love with Grasha. It might have been the morning he woke to find she had already fed the animals and started breakfast, humming an orcish song he did not recognize. It might have been the evening she helped him repair a section of fence and told him a joke that made him laugh until his sides hurt. It might have been the night she found him staring at his old military uniform and sat with him while he talked about the things he had done and the guilt he still carried. Or perhaps it had been happening gradually all along, each shared meal and conversation and moment of understanding building on the last until he looked at her one day and realized he could not imagine his life without her in it. The realization terrified him. Not because she was an orc, though he knew that should matter and found that it increasingly did not, but because caring for someone meant vulnerability, meant the risk of loss, meant all the complicated, messy emotions he had been avoiding since leaving the army. If Grasha noticed his growing feelings, she gave no sign. She was unfailingly kind but maintained a certain careful distance, as if afraid of overstepping invisible boundaries. Matthias wanted to close that distance but did not know how, did not know if she felt anything similar, or if he would only make things awkward by speaking. The matter came to a head on a particularly cold night in deep winter. Matthias had been working on repairing a bridle in the house when he heard a noise from the barn, a cry quickly muffled. He grabbed his coat and rushed outside, heart pounding, to find Grasha sitting in the loft with her head in her hands. "What is wrong?" he called up. "Are you hurt?" "No," Grasha said, but her voice was thick with tears. "I am fine. Go back inside." Matthias climbed the ladder, ignoring her protests, and found her wiping furiously at her eyes. "You are clearly not fine. Talk to me, please." "It is nothing. I am being foolish." "Grasha." Matthias sat down beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her, but not quite touching. "You have listened to me talk about my demons more times than I can count. Let me return the favor." She was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, Today is the anniversary of the raid that killed my family. I thought I was past the grief, that I had made peace with it. But tonight it all came back, and I just could not stop thinking about everything I lost. Matthias's heart ached for her. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. She tensed for a moment, then gripped his fingers tightly, as if he was the only thing keeping her anchored. "Grief does not follow a schedule," he said quietly. "It comes when it comes, and all we can do is endure until it passes. But you do not have to endure alone." "I have been alone with it for so long," Grasha said. "I do not know how to be otherwise." "Neither do I," Matthias admitted, "but perhaps we can figure it out together." Grasha turned to look at him, her amber eyes searching his face. "Why are you so kind to me? Why do you care what I feel?" The question hung in the cold air between them. This was the moment, Matthias realized. He could deflect, make a joke, retreat back behind safe boundaries. Or he could take the risk and speak the truth that had been growing in his heart for weeks. "Because I care about you," he said simply. "Because you have become incredibly important to me. Because when I think about the future now, you are in it, and I do not know when that happened, but it feels as fundamental as breathing." Grasha's breath caught. "Matthias, I am an orc. You are human. This cannot work." "Why not?" he asked. "Who is here to say it cannot? Your clan cast you out. I have no family left. We are both alone in the world except for each other. Why should we deny ourselves happiness because of what we are supposed to be?" "Because it is dangerous," Grasha said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Because if anyone found out, they would kill us both." "Then we will be careful," Matthias said. "We are already careful, and we will have each other, which is more than either of us had before." Grasha closed her eyes, a tear escaping to track down her green cheek. "I did not want to feel this way. I told myself I would help you, then leave, and it would be simple. But then you were kind and funny, and you listened when I talked, and you looked at me like I was a person worth knowing. And somewhere in all of that, I fell in love with you, and it terrifies me." Joy and relief surged through Matthias in equal measure. "You love me?" "Yes," Grasha said, opening her eyes to meet his. "I love you, you foolish, wonderful human. I love you so much it hurts." Matthias raised his free hand to her face, gently wiping away her tears with his thumb. "Then we are both fools together. Because I love you too, Grasha. I think I have for weeks now." "This is a terrible idea," Grasha said, but she was leaning into his touch. "Absolutely terrible," Matthias agreed. "What do you say we try it anyway?" Grasha laughed, the sound watery but genuine, and then she kissed him. It was gentle and tentative at first, both of them uncertain, but then Matthias's hand slid into her hair and she pulled him closer, and the kiss deepened into something fierce and passionate and utterly right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grasha rested her forehead against his. "If we do this, if we truly try to make this work, I need to know you are certain. I need to know you will not wake up one day and regret choosing an orc." "I am not choosing an orc," Matthias said firmly. "I am choosing you. Grasha, the woman who saved my harvest, who made me laugh when I thought I had forgotten how, who sits with me through the dark moments and makes the good ones better just by being there. That is who I am choosing, and I have never been more certain of anything." Grasha kissed him again, and this time it tasted like joy and hope and the beginning of something neither of them had dared to dream of. They talked through most of the night, curled together under blankets in the loft. They talked about what a future together might look like, about the challenges they would face, about the life they could build if they were willing to fight for it. When Matthias finally climbed down the ladder and returned to his house in the early hours of the morning, everything had changed. The winter continued, but now it held a different quality. Matthias and Grasha worked together as before, but now they did so as partners in every sense. They stole kisses between chores, sat close together in the evenings, and shared a contentment that both had thought impossible. They were careful, always watchful for signs of visitors, but the farm's isolation proved to be a blessing. Weeks passed without anyone coming by, and the few times traders or traveling merchants appeared, Grasha simply retreated to the barn until they left. It was not a perfect system, but it worked. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting to reveal muddy fields and the first hints of green. Matthias and Grasha planned the new planting season together, discussing what crops to prioritize and what improvements to make. The work was hard but satisfying, and Matthias found himself happier than he had been in years. One evening in early spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grasha said quietly, "I have been thinking about the future." "Oh." Matthias glanced at her, noting the serious expression on her face. "This has been wonderful these past months, better than I could have imagined. But I worry about what happens when we cannot hide anymore. Eventually, someone will see me, someone will talk. And then everything becomes much more difficult." Matthias took her hand. "I know, I have thought about it too. What do you want to do?" "I do not want to run," Grasha said. "I am tired of running, of hiding, of pretending I am something I am not, but I do not want to put you in danger either." "We are in this together," Matthias said firmly. "Whatever we decide together." Grasha squeezed his hand. "Then I think we need to be prepared to defend our right to be together, to have a plan for when, not if, someone challenges us, because I am not giving you up without a fight." "Neither am I," Matthias said. "So let us plan." They spent the following weeks preparing. Matthias taught Grasha the property boundaries and the best defensive positions. He retrieved his old military weapons from storage and made sure both of them knew how to use them. They stored extra supplies and made arrangements with a friendly trader who asked no questions to serve as a messenger if needed. It was not much, but it was something. The confrontation came sooner than either expected. Matthias was working in the field one warm spring day when he saw a group of riders approaching. 4 men, armed and wearing the militia bands of the nearby town. His heart sank, but he forced himself to appear calm as he walked to meet them. Behind him, he knew Grasha would be watching from the barn, ready to run or fight as needed. "Matthias Aldren," the lead rider called out. "That is me," Matthias said. "What can I do for you gentlemen?" "We have had reports of an orc in this area," the man said. His name was Thomas Carter, Matthias remembered, a former soldier who now led the local militia. "Several travelers claim to have seen signs of orc presence near your farm." "This is frontier land," Matthias said carefully. "Orcs pass through sometimes, but I have not had any trouble." "You are sure about that?" Thomas's eyes were sharp, assessing. "Because harboring an orc is a serious crime, treason in fact." "I am aware of the law," Matthias said, "and I am telling you I have seen no orcs on my property." It was technically true. He had not seen Grasha today, so the statement was not a lie. But Thomas did not look convinced. "Mind if we look around?" he asked, in a tone that made it clear it was not really a question. Matthias's mind raced. If they searched thoroughly, they would find Grasha's belongings in the barn loft, evidence that someone else was living there. He needed to redirect them somehow. "Of course," he said. "Though I should warn you, I am recovering from an injury and have let some areas become cluttered. The barn in particular is a mess." "We will manage," Thomas said and gestured for his men to begin searching. Matthias led them around the property, his heart pounding. The men checked the house first, finding nothing suspicious. Then they moved to the barn. Matthias tried to stay calm as they poked through the ground floor, noting feed stores and tools and equipment. Then one of them spotted the ladder to the loft. "What is up there?" he asked. "Storage mostly," Matthias said. "Old furniture, spare tools, that sort of thing." The man climbed the ladder and Matthias held his breath. But when the militiaman reached the top, he simply glanced around and came back down. "Nothing up there but junk," he reported. Matthias nearly sagged with relief. Grasha must have cleared out her things and hidden somewhere. She had been smart enough to anticipate this. Thomas looked frustrated but not entirely satisfied. "Aldren, I will be plain with you. If I find out you are lying to me, if I discover you have been sheltering an orc, you will hang. Do you understand?" "I understand," Matthias said. "But I have nothing to hide." The militia left after another hour of searching, finding nothing incriminating. Matthias waited until they were well out of sight before calling out softly, "Grasha." She emerged from the tree line, carrying a bundle of her possessions. "I heard them coming and had time to hide. But Matthias, this is exactly what I was afraid of. They are looking for me. It is only a matter of time before they find proof." "Then we need to make a decision," Matthias said. "We can try to maintain the secret and live in constant fear of discovery. We can run, find somewhere more remote and start over, or we can fight for the right to live as we choose." "Fight how?" Grasha asked. "Against the whole town, the militia." "With the law," Matthias said. "There are laws about land rights and who can and cannot remove someone from their property. If we were married, you would have legal standing as my wife. It would be much harder for them to simply take you away." Grasha stared at him. "Matthias, I do not think a marriage between a human and an orc is legal." "It is not explicitly illegal either," Matthias said. "The law is silent on the matter, which means it comes down to interpretation and who is willing to defend that interpretation. It would not be easy, but it might be possible. You are talking about marrying me not just because you want to, but as a legal strategy," Grasha said slowly. "I am talking about marrying you because I love you and want to spend my life with you," Matthias corrected. "The legal protection would just be a benefit. But Grasha, I was going to ask you anyway. This has just moved up my timeline." He took both her hands in his. "Grasha, these past months with you have been the best of my life. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible. I want to build a life with you, face whatever comes together and grow old beside you. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Grasha's face now, but she was smiling. "You are insane. This will never work. Everyone will oppose us." "Is that a yes or a no?" Matthias asked, his own eyes stinging. "Yes," Grasha said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, you wonderful, impossible man, I will marry you." They held each other as the sun set, both terrified and elated, knowing they had chosen a difficult path but unable to regret it. The next challenge was actually getting married. The local priest would never agree to perform the ceremony, and going to the town for any reason seemed dangerous now. But Matthias remembered something from his military days. In frontier regions, ship captains and military officers could perform marriages in situations where traditional clergy were unavailable. The law had been written for soldiers marrying in the field, but it might apply to their situation. After some thought, Matthias rode to visit an old friend from his army days. Marcus Adams lived about a day's ride away, had been discharged with honor, and Matthias thought he might be sympathetic. It was a risk, but everything was a risk now. Marcus received him with surprise but warmth. Over drinks, Matthias carefully told him an edited version of events. He had met a woman, an orc. She had been kind to him. They had fallen in love, and he wanted to marry her despite the social implications. Marcus listened quietly, then said, "You are aware this is madness." "I am," Matthias said. "But it is the right kind of madness. Marcus, I have never asked you for anything, but I am asking now. Will you officiate our marriage?" Marcus studied him for a long moment. As a former officer, I do have that authority, technically. But Matthias, if this goes wrong, if people come after you, I cannot protect you. I am not asking you to, Matthias said. I am just asking you to help us make our union official in the eyes of the law. The rest we will handle ourselves. Marcus sighed. You always were stubborn. All right. I will do it. But let us do it quickly and quietly, before I come to my senses. 3 days later, in a simple ceremony in Matthias's farmhouse with Marcus as witness and officiant, Matthias Aldren and Grasha exchanged vows. There were no fancy clothes or elaborate decorations, just two people promising to love and support each other for as long as they both lived. Matthias slipped a simple iron ring onto Grasha's finger. She did the same for him, and Marcus pronounced them married under the laws of the kingdom. I hope you know what you are doing, Marcus said as he prepared to leave. But for what it is worth, I can see that you love each other. I hope that is enough. So do I, Matthias said. Life as a married couple was both wonderful and terrifying. Grasha no longer had to hide in the barn loft. She moved into the house properly, and they began truly building a shared life. They worked the farm together, made plans for the future, and found joy in the simple domestic moments that made up a partnership. But the threat of discovery remained constant. They were careful to avoid visitors when possible, and Grasha stayed out of sight when traders came through. It was not a sustainable long-term solution, but they took each day as it came. The crisis came 2 months after their marriage. Thomas Carter and his militia returned, this time with more men and a much grimmer purpose. Matthias saw them coming and quickly found Grasha. They are back, and this time they mean business, he said. We need to make a stand. Grasha's jaw set in determination. Then we make a stand. They met the militia together, Matthias and Grasha standing side by side in front of their house. Thomas's expression hardened when he saw Grasha. So the reports were true, he said. You have been harboring an orc. Aldren, you are under arrest for treason. I have not been harboring anyone, Matthias said calmly. Grasha is my wife. She lives here legally as my spouse. Stunned silence met this declaration. Then Thomas laughed harshly. Your wife? You expect anyone to believe that? You cannot marry an orc. Actually, I can, Matthias said. He pulled out the marriage document Marcus had prepared, stamped with an officer's seal. This is a legal marriage, performed by a discharged officer with the authority to do so. My wife has every right to be here. Thomas snatched the document and read it, his expression growing darker. This is a farce. No court will recognize this. Then we will let a court decide, Matthias said. But until then, you have no legal grounds to remove her from our property. This is our land, purchased and owned free and clear. We have broken no law. She is an orc, one of the other militiamen spat. That is crime enough. Being an orc is not a crime, Matthias said. Check your law books if you do not believe me. There are laws against raiding and murder and theft, and she has done none of those things. She has simply lived here peacefully and helped me work my farm. What law has been broken? Thomas's face was red with anger, but Matthias could see uncertainty there too. The man knew the law, and Matthias had put him in a difficult position. If he arrested them without clear legal grounds, he could be challenged. But if he did nothing, he would look weak. This is not over, Thomas finally said. I will be taking this to the magistrate, and if he rules against you, you will both answer for this mockery. Then we will see the magistrate, Matthias said. We have nothing to hide. The militia left, and Matthias and Grasha retreated to their house. They held each other, both shaking from the adrenaline and fear, but also from a strange sense of triumph. They had taken their stand. Now they would see if it held. The summons came a week later. They were to appear before the regional magistrate to answer questions about their marriage and living arrangements. It was not technically a trial, but it might as well have been. The outcome would determine whether they could continue living openly or would have to flee. Matthias and Grasha made the journey to the regional seat together, both dressed in their best clothing and carrying their documentation. The magistrate, an older man named Henry Crowley, received them in his chambers with an expression of profound skepticism. "This is a most unusual case," he said, studying the marriage document. "Mr. Aldren, you are aware that what you have done is, at best, highly irregular." "I am aware," Matthias said, "but I am also aware that it is not explicitly illegal. I served 12 years in the king's army defending this kingdom. I purchased my land legally and have worked it honestly. I met Grasha, fell in love with her, and married her according to the forms of law available to me. We have harmed no one and broken no law." "You married an orc," Magistrate Crowley said, "an enemy of the kingdom." "An individual orc who has committed no crimes," Matthias countered. "Your Honor, I fought in the border wars. I know what orc raiding parties can do. But Grasha is not a raider. She left her clan rather than participate in violence against innocents. She has lived peacefully, harming no one. She saved my harvest when I was injured and would have lost everything. She has been a good partner and a good wife. Is she to be punished simply for what she is, regardless of what she has done?" The magistrate turned to Grasha. "You have not spoken. Do you have anything to say?" Grasha met his eyes steadily. "I know what I am, Your Honor. I know most humans see my kind as monsters, but I left my people because I could not stomach their cruelty. I have tried to live peacefully, to harm no one, to simply exist in this world. I fell in love with Matthias because he saw past what I am to who I am. I do not want wealth or status or anything except to live quietly with my husband and work our farm. That is all I have ever wanted." Magistrate Crowley was silent for a long time, studying them both. Finally, he said, "This is perhaps the strangest case I have ever heard. By the strictest interpretation of the law, you have done nothing explicitly illegal. The marriage may be irregular, but it was performed by someone with the technical authority to do so. You have broken no criminal statutes." Relief began to bloom in Matthias's chest, but the magistrate was not finished. "However," he continued, "I cannot simply ignore the social and political implications of allowing this to stand. The precedent it would set could lead to all manner of complications. I need time to consider this carefully." "How much time?" Matthias asked. "A week," the magistrate said. "Return then, and I will give you my decision. Until then, do not leave the region." They returned to the farm in a state of anxious uncertainty. A week felt like an eternity, but there was nothing to do but wait and hope. They threw themselves into farm work, trying to stay busy, but the worry was always there, a constant wait. On the 6th day, Marcus appeared at their door with urgent news. "There is talk in town," he said. "Thomas Carter has been stirring up sentiment against you. He is organizing people to challenge the magistrate's decision if it goes in your favor. There could be violence, Matthias." "Then we will defend ourselves," Matthias said grimly. "We are not running." "I know," Marcus said. "That is why I brought reinforcements," he gestured, and Matthias saw 3 other men approaching. Former soldiers from his old unit, men he had served with and trusted. They had come to stand with him. "You saved my life in the border campaigns," one of them said. "I owe you. And besides, what Carter is doing is not right. A man should be able to live peacefully on his own land." Tears pricked Matthias's eyes. "Thank you, all of you." The next day they returned to the magistrate's chambers. A crowd had gathered outside, some hostile, some merely curious. Thomas Carter was there with his militia, looking grim and determined. But Marcus and the other veterans were there too, standing visibly with Matthias and Grasha. Magistrate Crowley called them into his chambers, then surprised everyone by opening the doors so the crowd could hear his decision. "I have considered this matter carefully," he said. "I have reviewed the law and consulted with other legal scholars. What I have found is this. While a marriage between a human and an orc is highly unusual and unprecedented in this region, it is not illegal. The marriage was performed according to proper forms by someone with the authority to do so. Mr. Aldren and his wife have broken no laws in living together on their own property." Hope surged, but the magistrate held up a hand. "However, the broader question of whether such marriages should be recognized is one that will require further legal and political debate. I cannot rule on that larger question. What I can rule on is this specific case." He looked directly at Matthias and Grasha. "You have conducted yourselves with dignity throughout this process. You have not threatened anyone, have not broken any laws, and have simply asked to be left alone to live your lives. In this kingdom, we pride ourselves on justice and the rule of law, not mob justice or prejudice. Therefore, my ruling is this: your marriage will be recognized as legal in this jurisdiction. You may continue to live on your property without interference, provided you continue to obey all laws and harm no one." The crowd erupted, some in anger, some in surprise, a few in support. Thomas Carter looked furious, but he was a militia leader, not a mob boss, and he could not openly defy a magistrate's ruling. Magistrate Crowley was not finished. "Furthermore, I am ruling that any attempt to harm Mr. Aldren or his wife, to burn their property, or to drive them from their land will be treated as criminal assault and property destruction. They are under the protection of the law like any other citizens. That protection will be enforced." It was more than Matthias had dared hope for. Not just permission to stay, but actual legal protection. He gripped Grasha's hand tightly, hardly daring to believe it. They left the magistrate's chambers to a mixed reception. Some people glared at them with open hostility. Others looked thoughtful or even sympathetic. Marcus and the other veterans surrounded them, making sure they reached their horses safely. "You actually did it," Marcus said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You crazy bastard, you actually did it." "We did it together," Matthias said, looking at Grasha. "We stood up for ourselves and the law stood with us." The ride back to the farm was surreal. They had won. Not completely, perhaps. There would still be people who hated them, still be those who would oppose them. But they had legal recognition, official protection, and the right to live as they chose. That night they celebrated quietly in their home, just the two of them, a simple meal and the profound relief of knowing they could stay. "What now?" Grasha asked as they sat together watching the fire. "Now we live," Matthias said. "We work our farm, we build our life, and we show everyone that two people from different worlds can make a home together. We prove that love is stronger than prejudice." "That is a lot of pressure," Grasha said, but she was smiling. "We have already survived a broken leg, a harvest crisis, winter, and a legal battle," Matthias pointed out. "I think we can handle whatever comes next." Life did not become easy after the magistrate's ruling. There were still people in the region who disapproved of their marriage, who refused to trade with them, or who made their displeasure known in small ways. But there were also those who gradually came to accept them, who saw that they were simply two people trying to live peacefully. Marcus remained a friend and ally, visiting regularly and helping spread word that Matthias and Grasha were good people who deserved to be left alone. The other veterans who had stood with them also checked in periodically, creating a small but important support network. As spring turned to summer, Matthias and Grasha planted their crops together, working side by side as they had through the winter. The fields flourished under their care, and by the time harvest season came around again, They had a bumper crop that exceeded even Matthias's best year alone. They hired help for the harvest, a young man from a nearby farm whose family was practical enough to care more about good wages than who was signing them. The work went smoothly, and the young man went back to his family with stories of how the orc woman worked as hard as anyone and how the farm was well run and prosperous. Slowly, gradually, perception began to shift. Not everyone would ever accept them, but enough people came around that they could live without constant fear. Trade became easier. Neighbors began nodding to them at market. Life was not normal by any stretch, but it was theirs. One evening in late summer, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Grasha said quietly, "I am pregnant." Matthias's head whipped around so fast he nearly hurt his neck. "What? Pregnant?" Grasha repeated, a nervous smile on her face. "I am carrying our child." Joy exploded in Matthias's chest, so intense it almost hurt. He pulled Grasha into his arms, holding her tightly. "Are you happy about this?" he asked. "I know we never really discussed children." "I am terrified," Grasha admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I want this if you do." "I do," Matthias said fervently. "I absolutely do. We are going to be parents." They held each other as the sun set, both awed and frightened by this new development. A child of both their worlds, human and orc, would face challenges neither could fully imagine. But they would love their child fiercely and teach them to be strong and kind, to stand up for what was right, and to never let anyone else define who they could be. The pregnancy progressed without major complications. Grasha remained strong and healthy, continuing to work the farm almost until the day she gave birth. Matthias fussed over her constantly, which she tolerated with amused patience. When the time came, it was Marcus who rode to fetch the midwife, an older woman who had agreed to help after some persuasion and a generous payment. The birth was long and difficult, as first births often are, but Grasha endured with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. In the early hours of a cool autumn morning, their daughter was born. She had green-tinted skin, softer than her mother's but unmistakably orcish. Her ears were slightly pointed, and she had small nubs that would likely develop into proper tusks as she grew. But her eyes, when she opened them, were a warm brown like Matthias's own. "She is perfect," Matthias whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that shook from emotion. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Grasha asked, exhausted but glowing with joy. They had discussed names extensively, wanting something that honored both their heritages. Finally, they settled on Hope, because that was what she represented. Hope for a future where human and orc could live together in peace. Hope that love could overcome prejudice. Hope that their family would not only survive but thrive. Hope Aldren grew quickly, a bright and curious child who was utterly adored by both her parents. Matthias taught her to read and to understand the farm. Grasha taught her orcish language and traditions, making sure she understood both sides of her heritage. Marcus became a frequent visitor and unofficial uncle, often bringing small gifts for his honorary niece. The presence of a half-orc child in the region created another wave of controversy, but the magistrate's ruling held. The Aldren family was under legal protection, and gradually, even the most skeptical locals had to admit that the child was innocent and deserved the same rights as any other. As Hope grew from infant to toddler to a bright 6-year-old girl, the social landscape continued to evolve. Other frontier families, seeing that the Aldrens were prosperous and happy, began to question some of their own prejudices. There were even whispered stories of other human-orc relationships forming, though none as public as Matthias and Grasha's. 7 years after that fateful harvest, when Grasha had first appeared in Matthias's field, They stood together watching Hope play in the yard. Their farm was thriving, their family was healthy, and while they still faced occasional prejudice, they had built a life they could both be proud of. "You ever regret it?" Matthias asked, pulling Grasha close. "Staying here, marrying me, all the complications it has brought?" "Never," Grasha said firmly. "This life, this family, this farm, it is everything I ever wanted even when I did not know I wanted it. You gave me a home when I had been wandering lost. You gave me love when I thought I would be alone forever. You gave me hope in every sense of the word." "Why would I regret that?" "I love you," Matthias said. "I will love you until my last breath." "And I will love you beyond that," Grasha replied, kissing him softly. Hope came running up, demanding attention and launching into an excited story about a butterfly she had seen. Matthias scooped her up, spinning her around while she giggled, and Grasha watched them both with a smile that held all the warmth of the sun. The farm that had once been a lonely outpost was now a home filled with love and laughter. The fields that had nearly been lost to a broken leg and bad timing now flourished under the care of two people who had chosen each other against all odds. And the future, once so uncertain, now stretched out before them full of promise and possibility. In the end, their story was a simple one. Two lonely people had found each other, had chosen to stand together against prejudice and fear, and had built something beautiful from their courage and commitment. They had proven that love could bridge even the widest divides. That family was defined not by what you were, but by who you chose to be with. And that home was anywhere you were accepted for your true self. The harvest that had brought them together had been saved, but more importantly, they had saved each other. And that, Matthias thought as he held his wife and daughter close, was the greatest harvest of all. Years continued to pass in a gentle rhythm of seasons and growth. Hope thrived, developing her mother's determination and her father's compassion. She learned to work the farm with skill, to read the weather like Matthias, and to move with the quiet efficiency Grasha had taught her. By the time she was 10, she could handle most farm tasks competently, and was beginning to show interest in the broader world beyond their land. The farm itself had expanded modestly. Matthias and Grasha had purchased an adjacent plot when it came up for sale, allowing them to diversify their crops and bring in additional income. They employed two permanent hands now, young men from families who had come to respect the Aldrens and see past old prejudices. The work was steady and rewarding, providing not just for their own family, but contributing to the regional food supply. Socially, their position had stabilized into something resembling normalcy, though it would never be entirely conventional. The local market accepted their goods without complaint. Their neighbors, while not all friendly, were at least civil. Hope attended informal lessons with other children in the area, taught by a retired schoolteacher who had decided that education mattered more than species. It was not a perfect situation, but it was a real life, built on solid foundations of hard work, love, and mutual respect. One autumn day, when Hope was 12, a messenger arrived with unexpected news. Magistrate Crowley, who had ruled in their favor all those years ago, had passed away. His successor wanted to meet with the Aldrens to discuss their unique legal status. Matthias and Grasha exchanged worried glances. A new magistrate could mean a new ruling, potentially undoing all the protection they had gained. But they had no choice except to respond to the summons. They made the journey to the regional seat, bringing Hope with them this time. She was old enough to understand what was at stake and deserved to be part of decisions that would affect her future. The new magistrate, a woman named Sarah Whitmore, received them in chambers that looked much the same as they had years before. She was younger than Crowley had been, with sharp eyes that assessed them carefully. "Mr. Aldren, Mrs. Aldren, thank you for coming," she said formally. "And this must be your daughter, Hope," Grasha said, one hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. "Yes, this is Hope." Magistrate Whitmore studied Hope with interest. "I have reviewed Magistrate Crowley's ruling in your case extensively. I wanted to meet you in person before making any decisions about whether to uphold or modify it." Matthias's stomach clenched. "We have broken no laws, Your Honor. We have lived quietly and peacefully, harming no one." "I am aware," Whitmore said. "In fact, my review suggests you have been model citizens. Your farm is productive and well run. You pay your taxes promptly. You have had no criminal complaints filed against you. You have integrated into the community as much as circumstances allow." She paused, her expression thoughtful. "But I will be honest with you. There are those who would like me to reverse Crowley's decision, who argue that the marriage should never have been recognized. They claim it sets a dangerous precedent. And what do you think?" Grasha asked, her voice steady despite the tension Matthias could feel in her posture. "I think," Whitmore said slowly, "that the law exists to provide justice and order, not to enforce prejudice. I think your family has proven that individuals should be judged by their character and actions, not by their species. And I think that any ruling I make will have implications far beyond your personal situation." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the town beyond. "The frontier is changing. The old certainties, the old divisions, they are becoming less absolute. There are more interactions between humans and orcs now, not all of them violent. Trade, negotiation, even the occasional cooperation. The world is becoming more complicated." Whitmore turned back to face them. "Your family represents a possible future. One where the lines we have drawn are not immutable, where people can choose to bridge divides rather than defend them. It is a controversial vision and many will oppose it, but I believe it is the right one." Hope had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now she spoke up. "Your Honor, I did not choose to be born half human and half orc, but I am proud of what I am, proud of both my parents. They have taught me to work hard, to treat people fairly, and to stand up for what is right." "Is not that what matters?" Whitmore's expression softened as she looked at Hope. "Young lady, you have been raised well, and you are absolutely correct. That is what matters." She returned to her desk and pulled out an official-looking document. "I am formally upholding Magistrate Crowley's ruling. Your marriage is recognized as legal. Your family has full protection under the law, and anyone who attempts to harm or dispossess you will face criminal charges. Moreover, I am expanding that ruling to establish a broader precedent. Individuals of any species who conduct themselves peacefully and lawfully are entitled to the same rights and protections as any citizen." Matthias felt tears sting his eyes. This was more than they had dared hope for, a complete validation of everything they had fought for. Beside him, Grasha was openly crying, and Hope looked stunned but happy. "Thank you," Matthias managed to say. "Your Honor, thank you. You cannot know what this means to us." "I think I can," Whitmore said gently. "Now go home to your farm and your life. You have earned it." The journey back was jubilant. They had not just kept what they had but gained official recognition that extended beyond their specific case. It was a true victory, one that might change things for others facing similar situations. That night, they celebrated properly. Marcus and several other friends came to the farm, bringing food and drink. They toasted to the magistrate's ruling, to friendship, to the future. Hope stayed up late, basking in the warmth and happiness of adults who cared about her family. When everyone had finally left and Hope had been put to bed, Matthias and Grasha stood together on their porch as they had so many times before. The farm was quiet, peaceful, home in the truest sense. "We did it," Grasha said softly. "We actually did it. We built a life together despite everything that stood against us." "We had help," Matthias said. "Marcus, the magistrates, friends who stood with us when it mattered. But yes, we did it. We proved that love and determination can overcome even the deepest prejudices." Grasha leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think about that day sometimes. The day I first saw you fall from that roof. I almost did not help. I almost kept walking, kept hiding, kept surviving alone. What made me stay and work your field, I am still not entirely sure." "I am glad you did," Matthias said fervently. "My broken leg turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me because it brought you into my life." "Such a strange thing to be grateful for," Grasha said with a soft laugh. "But I understand. That harvest, those fields, they gave us a reason to start talking, to start trusting. Everything else grew from there." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Matthias thought about the journey they had taken together, from that first wary meeting to this moment of hard-won peace. So much had changed, yet the core of what mattered remained constant: their love for each other and their commitment to building a life together. "What do you think Hope's future will be like?" Grasha asked eventually. "Will she face the same challenges we did, or will things be better by the time she is grown?" "I think things will be better," Matthias said. "Not perfect, but better. Magistrate Whitmore's ruling will help. Our example will help, and Hope herself will help by showing people what someone of mixed heritage can be. She is smart and strong and kind. She will make her own way." "I hope you are right," Grasha said. "I want her to have choices we did not have. I want her to be able to love who she loves without fear." "She will," Matthias promised. "We have fought for that. We have given her a foundation to build on. The rest will be up to her, but she will not be starting from nothing the way we did." The years that followed proved Matthias's optimism largely correct. Hope grew into a confident young woman who moved easily between human and orcish cultural contexts. By the time she was 18, she had become something of a bridge figure herself, helping to negotiate trade agreements between frontier human settlements and the more peaceful orc clans. The farm continued to prosper under Matthias and Grasha's management. They had become respected members of their community, their initial notoriety fading into a kind of local legend. Young people would point them out sometimes as proof that the old divisions did not have to define the future. Marcus remained a close friend until his death at age 72, surrounded by the extended family that included the Aldrens as honorary members. At his funeral, Matthias spoke about the courage it took to stand with someone when doing so was dangerous, and how Marcus had never wavered in his support. More human-orc partnerships formed in the region, emboldened by the Aldren's example and Magistrate Whitmore's precedent. None of them had an easy time of it, but the path was at least somewhat clearer than it had been. The world was changing, slowly but inexorably, toward something more inclusive. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Matthias and Grasha stood in the same field where she had first appeared all those years ago. It was autumn again, harvest time, and the wheat stood golden and ready just as it had back then. "I still remember seeing you for the first time," Matthias said, holding Grasha's hand. "I thought you were stealing from me, and I was so angry despite being terrified. I could not have imagined then what you would come to mean to me." "I remember being so nervous," Grasha said. "I knew helping you was risky, but I could not stand by and watch your harvest rot. You had worked so hard. It did not seem right." "One impulsive decision to help a stranger," Matthias mused, "and it changed both our lives completely." "Do you regret any of it?" Grasha asked. "Even the hard parts?" Matthias thought about the pain and fear they had endured, the battles they had fought, the prejudice they had faced. Then he thought about the love they had built, the family they had created, the life they had made together. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "Every challenge was worth it to have this, to have you." Grasha pulled him close, kissing him with the same passion she had shown in that barn loft 20 years ago. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Should we harvest this field together?" Grasha asked. "For old time's sake." "I think we should," Matthias agreed, "though I promise to be more careful on ladders this time." They worked side by side as the sun moved across the sky, cutting and bundling wheat with the practiced ease of 2 decades of partnership. Hope came to help in the afternoon, bringing her own scythe and working with the efficiency they had taught her. As evening approached and the last of the wheat was shocked, the 3 of them stood together at the edge of the field, surveying their work. "This is good land," Hope said. "Good land and a good home. Thank you for building this for me." "We built it for all of us," Grasha said, pulling her daughter close. "A place where we could be ourselves without apology, where love mattered more than species, where family was defined by choice and commitment." "It is more than I ever dreamed of," Matthias added. "And it is all because your mother was brave enough to step out of the shadows and help a stranger in need. And because you were brave enough to see past what I was to who I was," Grasha countered. "We did this together." As the sun set on the farm, casting long shadows across the harvested field, the Aldren family stood together in perfect contentment. They had faced every challenge thrown at them and emerged stronger. They had built something lasting and true from the most unlikely of beginnings. The broken leg that had once seemed like disaster had been transformed into the beginning of something beautiful. The harvest that might have rotted became the foundation of a love story that would be told for generations. And in a small farmhouse on the frontier, where prejudice had given way to understanding and fear, had been replaced by love, 3 people prepared dinner together, laughing and talking and simply being a family. It was, Matthias thought as he watched his wife and daughter work side by side in the kitchen, the happiest ending he could have imagined. Not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real and earned and built on foundations that would not crumble. The harvest was in, the family was together, and the future stretched out before them full of promise. And that was everything.